Hi, thank you for joining me today and watching this video, and thank you to whoever shared this with you. Today we're going to be joined by Charlotte Law, and she's going to be discussing with us her story of how her daughter was hacked and her images, some very personal images, were shared online. If you are familiar with her story, she was able to reach out to the FBI through about months of rigorous effort and grief that her and her family had to go through, and get the site that had stolen her daughter's images and put them online for people to see. So please be very sensitive and respectful of Charlotte and her story, and please join us in our call. Thank you.
Nice to talk to you. Yes, good to see you after 5 years.
Yeah, it's been like 5 years, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, and we're not even that far away. You're in LA still, right?
That's true.
I'm just sharing on Facebook right now to get everybody in here. And I want to welcome Cami and Charlotte Laws. Charlotte is a renowned Renaissance woman. So I've heard from the interviews I've seen. I didn't know personally, actually. And I'm glad that we were able to connect and whatnot. We've kind of been silent since the whole incident,
Yeah.
For just personal reasons. And it's good to finally reconnect. Charlotte is also the author of Rebel in High Heels, and you have a new book coming out, correct?
I do, in March, called Devil in the Basement.
Rebel in the Basement, cool.
Yeah.
And is that also related to what we're covering tonight?
It's actually not. It's about my grandfather who was murdered by a devil worshiper in 1948. So it's a book based on the true story, and it's a pretty amazing story.
Wow.
Back in West Virginia. So, yeah. So I did a lot of research, and it's a really interesting story.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's intense. So how did you hear about this from firsthand from the family, or?
Yeah, I'm adopted. So I tracked down my birth parents in my late 20s. And then as I got older, I was able to meet various cousins and found out about my grandfather, who is my birth mother's father. And also met my brother and sister for the first time about 5 years ago. So kind of got to know the whole family, went back to West Virginia, met cousins and other people, looked through the newspapers, because this was a headline in the newspapers all over the country when this happened. It was a double murder suicide, and he set off 2 bombs in the town, the devil worshiper did. And so it's a really interesting story, and I just did a lot of research, and I even went through the devil worshiper's house, which is still standing and almost looks exactly the same as it did in 1948. And so it's kind of interesting, yeah.
Is his family still there?
He also killed his wife at the time, in addition to my grandfather. And so the wife's family still lives in that house, and they have the gun in the house that killed both of them. They still own the gun. And and he did a lot of his nefariousness in the basement. And so he was one of the first Satanists in the US, part of the first Satanist cult, which was actually out of Ohio. And so, he's one of the first documented ones. So it's kind of cool.
Wow. So add that to your list. I was just watching videos, to be honest. It was like 2 PhDs. You're a bouncer at some point?
No, I have 1 PhD. I have 2 master's degrees. I have 1 PhD.
Okay. Sorry, I heard that wrong.
I wasn't a bouncer, no. I was a bodyguard, yes.
Oh, bodyguard. Whoa. All right.
Bodyguard. And I'm only 4'11".
Well, just get the shot where it counts.
That's right.
Awesome. Okay. Well, the reason, if some of you aren't familiar with Charlotte Laws and her story, it mirrors that of my wife. And she was shared in the terrible experience that we had. That was both unfortunate and fortunate, because it's brought us all together to what we're doing, to what she did, number one, and what we're doing today. And her daughter was basically, she had more of a third-party perspective, where her daughter was hacked the same way my wife's was. And her images were put online without her consent. And it resulted in the shutting down of a website, several people in prison, and an amazing book and journey to add to Charlotte's list. And that's what we're going to be covering today. Before we get into that, you've heard my wife and I's story, and the real reason, trying to lay in the real reason behind FaceChex is it's not to prevent this, because it's very hard to prevent. There's sick individuals out there everywhere. It's more to take measures to stop it more quickly when it does happen, and have an outlet for people to identify this at the time it happens, because a lot of the incidences for your wife, or for my wife, sorry, and your daughter, they were both informed by friends, right?
Yeah, well, my daughter, both of us, both were hacked by a friend through Facebook. So the hacker got into a friend's Facebook account and then got into their accounts and into their emails, and was able to steal photographs from the email, which was then put online on the website isanyoneup.com.
Right.
Right.
And that same thing happened to Cammie, as a friend of yours, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And that hers had gotten access to hers as well. And unfortunately, you can't stop that. It's impossible. The only thing we can do is prevent it, and that was the hardest part. Was the time it took to get all this information down was the hardest thing for us.
Mm-hmm.
And the lasting damage it did, because we know things just don't come offline. It stays there, or on somebody's computer and things like that.
And they multiply. You know, when you have images online, they multiply and go into more and more websites. So that's why it's important to get the images down as quickly as possible.
Right. Yeah, and I think we talked earlier, and for my wife, we actually found dating profiles after the fact, and some social media profiles, and we had to go and get those down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know the day after when we got my daughter's picture down, the other people on the site all the next day went on to another website. So it was just like literally they just, it multiplied, that day. And then down the road, more and more websites would pick up those images. So
Yeah,
time is of the essence for sure.
And they did that because they knew those people had nothing to retaliate with. They knew they didn't know how to retaliate or how to stop them.
Right. It's hard because victims, you feel helpless. You feel like crawling into a ball and shutting out the world and turning off your computer, and you don't even want to tell anybody about it. I mean, most of these victims are they don't want to tell their families. They don't want to tell their friends. They're embarrassed. They're afraid. And it's scary because the internet is everywhere, and it can just, multiply and ruin your reputation. And you did nothing wrong, but it can, ruin your reputation. So it's a really difficult thing for victims. And I'm glad we now have laws in 38 states against revenge porn. And we have a federal law that's been introduced by Jackie Spear. So I'm hoping that will go into being at some point and pass. So we have come a long way in the last 5 years since all of this originally happened.
Now, your fears, once these laws pass, do you have any fears that they'll be able to go to other countries and do the same thing?
Well, there are laws that have passed in a lot of countries. You'd be surprised how many countries are stepping up to the plate on this. And so it's really a problem around the world, and a lot of countries have acknowledged that it's a problem. So it is true. You can always, hide out in some land that has no laws, and you can, take advantage of people and abuse people in this way. But at least many countries are, discussing the issue. It's all over the media. The legislators are doing something about it. So we've really made a ton of progress, and law enforcement is taking it seriously now, which they were not 5 years ago. Yeah. This was a new issue back then, and they were interested in brick and mortar crimes. They didn't have anything. They really didn't have generally any interest in cyberspace and dealing with internet crime. They didn't really know how to handle that or tackle that. But now they're really looking at it, and they're not blaming victims, and they're trying to really get the perpetrators.
Yeah, I heard there's a lot of victim blame. And are they discussing it all, going as far as going after individual privacy, like false representation of someone, cloning somebody's profile and pretending to be them as well?
I mean, there are different laws. You're just talking about different ways to get a perpetrator. You know, is that what you're saying? There are different laws that could come into being. If you don't have an anti-revenge porn law, for example, there could be other laws that they would be violating, and then you would be able to get them on that, like identity theft, for example, or there are various laws. So, but at least they're paying attention to this now, and because of the media, because of the attention, because of things like this, and other mainstream media outlets, a lot of people know about this issue, which they didn't before, and victims are not blaming themselves, and the public's not blaming victims like they used to, and it's become something that people talk about. And the more knowledge you have, the better chance you can protect yourself.
Yeah, my greatest fear is that people aren't realizing that can happen to them. And that's kind of been my fear this whole time, is that there's, I calculated it on one of my other live segments, there's about 1 billion to 2 billion fake profiles just on Facebook alone.
Wow.
Yeah, that was 83 million 4 or 5 years ago that they knew about. So multiply that out, plus you multiply out the advancements in technology, it's enormous. It's over 1 billion. Just on Facebook, not including Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat and all those. And the root of it was both Cammie and your daughter were both hacked by someone impersonating somebody else, whether they hacked them or they just downloaded all their public images, pretended to be them just to gain access, and then trick someone. Really sad. But anyway, so let's go into the story though, because as you said, I mean, it makes you want to curl up in a ball and just kind of go away. And that's kind of what we did for the last couple of years, I'd say. And it was really 2015 when you had taken down the guy whose name I wanted to use, Mr. M. And Is Anyone Up? Is that when it all started just repopulating into my head. I'd been doing copyright protection for 2 years at that point, or just over a year. And all of a sudden, we started looking to, more aggressively how we could do this image recognition, and then that's how this all came about. But you took the extended step of going and taking this journey, this very difficult journey, in pursuit of justice, in pursuit of taking these guys down to the FBI. So I want to share with people how that happened, because I noticed a lot of the live interviews didn't really capture exactly what happened. There's a lot around it, and I want to get more into that. And then also how our lives intersected when we didn't expect it.
Okay.
So we already covered some of my questions. Now, can you tell us a little bit about the day you found out that your daughter's images were put online and what you were feeling?
Yeah, my daughter was at her waitress job, and one of her friends told her, and she was hysterical and freaked out, and she called me and told me that she was on this website, and I had never heard of revenge porn at that time. I didn't know what it was. And so I started learning. I searched it, I found the photos, and then I started doing research on it. And, she just was really incapable of fighting on her own. So she kind of needed me to really be able to try to help her get those pictures down. And first I contacted the website owner, who refused to remove the pictures. And it just ended up being this huge battle. And in the meantime, I was finding out that she had a friend actually who also was on that website, and who had also been hacked. She knew she'd been hacked because she'd never sent her picture to anybody. She had taken it in her room 3 months earlier, and along with a whole bunch of like bathing suit shots and that kind of thing. And she sent them through her email to get to her computer. And so she was hacked through Facebook. It was somebody who took over one of her girlfriend's accounts and then got to her that way. And so she knew she'd been hacked because she'd never given the picture to anyone and had no intention of ever doing that. Well, it turned out one of her friends who was married actually also ended up with her picture on the website, and she had been hacked. And so that's when I thought to myself, two people I know on this site, and they've both been hacked. Yeah. And the media at the time, even though really revenge porn wasn't being discussed much, they were talking about it being angry exes who were submitting them. There was no mention of hacking whatsoever. And the media were really glorifying this particular website owner. They kind of seemed to think it was cool that he was doing this, and he was getting a lot of positive attention, unfortunately. And so I started reaching out to victims. And basically what I did is I would see somebody on the website. I would then contact them, but I had to be very careful how I contacted them because I knew it had to do with hacking. So I was afraid to do anything that had to do with electronics. So it couldn't be email. It couldn't be through Facebook. It couldn't be anything that would have been easy to contact them. I had to seek a phone number. So I would see if, what their last name was. Sometimes I had to go through somebody who I thought was a relative. I'd have to call and say, hi, are you related to blah, blah, blah? I need to speak to her. It's urgent. I can't tell you what it is, but could you have her call me? So I had this roundabout way that I started contacting all these victims. And I found out that 40% of the people on the site, based on my survey, had been hacked. 12% had been photoshopped. So in other words, they had never even taken a nude picture, but it looked like they were nude on the site. Someone had morphed their head with a porn star's body, and their reputation was being ruined in that way. So, after I got all this evidence together, my daughter and I went to Los Angeles Police Department, who were not very sympathetic.
Were they also linking to your daughter's Facebook page? Because they attempted that.
Yeah, they linked to her Twitter page and some other information about her. They had her city, and they had information about her on that particular website. And people were making comments about her picture. So that was kind of the modus operandi with all the different people on the site, there were some men on there as well. It was mainly women, but there were also some males on there who also did not want to be on the site. And some of them had also been hacked.
Yeah, I remember a little hockey player and a couple other guys.
Yeah, there was a law student, a male who was just about to become a lawyer. He was pretty freaked out about the whole thing. To start searching for a job. And there were a lot of people. I mean, Kayla even ran into another guy who was a waiter that she met who was on there, and he wanted to get off. So there were definitely males on there who did not want to be on that website as well. And they had been hacked by the same hacker. Some of them had been hacked by the same hacker that Cammie and my daughter were hacked by.
Now, her friend that was married, was she also infiltrated by the same friend?
Yeah, no, it was not the same friend, but it was the same hacker who did it.
Yeah,
it was not the same friend. Yeah,
you actually had an interesting story because you got in communication with the hacker, and he started going back and forth with you.
I did when I was calling, but he had put his own picture on the website, and so when I was calling victims, I had called the hacker and asked him about, but I never said anything about. I mean, I acted like I was just impartial, like I was doing a news article and I was a reporter. And I said, I just want to find out how you got on there. And he said, oh, I don't know. I guess it was an ex maybe. And I said, are you upset about being on there? And he said, no, I think it's kind of cool. And I said, okay, well, thank you very much. And that was the end of it. And I didn't know he was the hacker at the time until the FBI told me way later. And they said, did you know you were talking to the hacker? I said, no, but they knew I had talked to him.
You had control of this person's email at the time?
The what?
Because he had control of the person's email, or you tracked him down, the hacker, via the phone?
I've called him through the phone. He was a comedian. He wasn't really he did some stand-up comedy.
Really?
And so I found him through a comedy website and got his phone number. Wow. And I had called him. And somehow the FBI had known that I did that. And maybe the hacker even knew it. I'm not really sure how they knew that. But the FBI did ask me at one point and said, tell me that I had been talking to him. And then I realized, and I looked back through my notes and found the information on him. Yeah. So luckily I didn't give away any information when I was talking to him. That's why I was very careful with people not to say anything, because some of the people, I think 12% of the people wanted to be on the site and had submitted their pictures. And so I was like, I thought maybe they were friends of the website owner, so I had to be very careful talking to people, and I didn't want to disclose anything unless I knew for a fact that they were a victim.
Oh, because they were trying to perpetuate that was a real site. And so maybe some of them were actually just friends posting their pictures to support it.
Yeah, I mean, some people, yeah, and I just didn't want to alert the website owner to the fact that I was doing this and the fact that we had this coalition going and all these victims that were kind of coming together to fight against him. So I wanted to keep all of that, I didn't want him to know any of that. So I had to be very careful, every person I talked to make sure that they were a real victim and not a friend of his or something, or the hacker or, whatever.
Right.
So, yeah.
Cami, do you remember the conversation at all that you had with him? You had to regain access to your email, right?
Yeah, I was emailing back and forth with him, and I was just like, how could you do this? I was literally just asking him, like, why would you do this to me? Give me access to all my accounts. And he finally did give me back access. And it was a little strange. He hit on me and wanted to meet up in LA, and I was just like in shock, and then never heard from him again. But luckily I was able to give the transcripts to the FBI, so hopefully it helped them in some way.
Sorry, I just wanted to get more into the story there. You were talking about after the fact you took it to the police, and the police they weren't sympathetic at all.
Yeah, they weren't sympathetic. They did agree to open the case on hacking, but it was a female detective, and she just, she did the victim blaming, and she just didn't seem like she was too excited about even handling the case. And so I then called the FBI, and the FBI initially said, file a report online, which I figured meant that they weren't going to do anything. And I said, I see you help Scarlett Johansson when she gets hacked, but you don't help the average person. Yeah. And so when I said that, the receptionist or whoever it was said, let me transfer you to a detective. And I got transferred. And then I had a conversation, and they said they'd be coming to the house. So I'd have 3 FBI agents coming to the house. And so that was set up that way. And we had a victim. You came to the victims meeting too, didn't you? We had a victims meeting with the FBI. I think it was the 3rd time they'd come to our house. We had some of the victims came there so the FBI could talk to people all in one spot. And and they took the case, and they never blamed my daughter or blamed anybody, any of the victims. And I thought they did a good job handling it.
And how long did this all take? Do you remember the amount of time where you first found out about the images and pictures? Was it a whole month? And then to when you got them down, and then to the FBI, and then, could you give us a timeline a little bit?
Well, when her pictures went up, I think we got them down fairly quickly, even though it didn't feel quick at the time, because that's all I was doing all day, every day, from like 6 a.m. to midnight. I was trying to get these pictures down and making phone calls and doing all of these things. But I can't remember how long it was, but it wasn't that long it took. Ultimately, when I got her picture down, it was because I'd had some conversations with Hunter Moore's attorney, and then my husband, who's an attorney, finally got involved. He was reluctant initially, but when he got involved, he was just so fed up with hearing about all of this and just the whole situation that he said to the attorney, if it's not down in half an hour, I'm walking to the court. That's it. I'm fed up with it. And then her picture did come down. But it took a lot more effort to get other people's pictures down. And the website owner, eventually, because of the FBI investigation, he was pretty freaked out. So he kind of sold his website for a small amount of money to James McGibney. And that's why it went offline. And then later, like 6 months later, he said he was going to bring it back. He was going to put all the same pictures up. He was going to add and have driving directions on how to get to each of these victims' houses, like have addresses and driving directions. And that's what he said publicly. So that created this big uproar all over again. And that's when I put his home address on Twitter, which created even more craziness against me. And I was getting computer viruses, and I was getting calls, death threats. I had this stalker at my house, some guy sitting in a white car who was here on 2 separate evenings. I think he was trying to hack into the Wi-Fi network, is what I believe. And so it was, it was kind of scary, because I went out. What a great story.
Thank you for everybody that watched the video, and thank you for Charlotte for sharing her incredible story, and her journey and struggle that she had to go through. Again, you can see how this impacts people. This is really happening to real people. It could happen to you or your loved one. So please help us. Please join us in making the internet a safer place. Please join FaceChex. Support our Kickstarter. Thank you.